In a world where the peel for your brand new computer case is everything. Whoa, that was satisfying. Whoa, is that the new NV7? It's as epic as this music. In reality though, I mean, this is one of those highly anticipated enclosures in the dual chamber slash fish tank category, but is it as epic as Phanteks makes it out to be? Let's bring out the sassy Dimitri, shall we? The thing is, before we analyze, we gotta build. Wait a second, before actually we turn this on, let's get familiar with the NV7. Now, from a design perspective, Phanteks did a fantastic job on here. It looks just as good from the back as it does from the front, even with all the cables coming out. It is a bit heavy to work with. It is a full tower enclosure, so just make sure to engage that core, but at least we do have some spacing at the bottom to give us some lifting capabilities. Now, price-wise, let me know what you think. $219 for an enclosure that is in a dual chamber configuration, that is full tower, that is catering towards water cooling. It has no fans included, which I think is the right approach, because obviously you'll be populating your own if you're buying something of this class and status. And second of all, did you guys know I'm very uncomfortable right now? Whew. Interestingly, both Mike and Eber, when they saw this case with some screenshots, they were like, hold on a second, this case looks smaller. And this is all due to Phanteks' design process of making sure that it looks slim because of its height, but this is dual rear 120mm fans for exhaust. This is our motherboard space, so this case is far from small. I would say it's a proper full tower, you know what I mean? One of the ways they achieve this is having no frame on this corner, so both access to your components and the visuals are not compromised, but they did this smartly way where the frame itself is strong enough, so you don't actually need this front panel to add rigidity to this frame. For example, look at all this access. This is super easy to work with now. And even though we have a little bit of flex from the top, you can install all your water cooling hardware because of that height, and it shouldn't be an issue anyway, you know, without installing that front panel still. The I/O here is pretty interesting because you can relocate it from the front of the case to the back of the enclosure if you want to clean up this triangle and make sure that everything at the front of the case looks as minimalist as possible. It is a few screws in the back and you have to just rewire all your cables, but it's a very interesting addition to remove this from the front. While the button I/O is at the top here, once I turn it on, you'll see how beautiful this very minor illumination is on the power button. But here we have our whole DRGB controller. So you can have two channels, A, B. We have color, mode, and effects, and all that stuff is very nicely controlled directly from the enclosure. Of course, you can still plug in the hub into your motherboard. I've always appreciated what Phanteks has done with integrated lighting. So here we have dual channels, as you can see, 4 ports total. We also have a motherboard out, so you can connect this directly to the motherboard, control all the lighting accessories from the motherboard directly, and this is just running off dual SATA. I will say the metal mesh is the same as found on previous high-performance Phanteks enclosures, and the only dust filter is available at the bottom that is removed from the right side. The most interesting thing for me is this backside for the enclosure. So it is ventilated, it opens up to reveal all your stuff. It sits on 2 magnets, one at the top, one at the bottom, that you can, interestingly, remove. But of course, in doing so, the back panel no longer closes flush and just kind of dangles around. This here is very interesting, this whole cable channel right beside the motherboard I/O. So here we have 4 individual channels to use with these dividers, so you can organize your cables accordingly. And of course, because the power supply is also facing this way, you probably use this large channel here for that power cable. And then you can finish your cable management with these individual channels at the bottom of the enclosure. So when you close the rear panel, everything is nice and clean from the back. You can also completely bypass these channels if you don't want to deal with them with this rubber grommet at the bottom. Lastly, here we have a Velcro strap so that you can secure, let's say, your permanent cables and everything else that you might want to be taking out later is just loose around here. In practice, this plastic bit here for all your cables is actually pretty smart because you can not only just have everything collected, but also if, let's say, your USB cables are really long, you can sort of give them a few loops around these plastic channels, because this thing right now I have, let's say, what, 5 devices plugged in, and there's plenty of space in here that left for other devices. Plus you can easily remove this with 2 screws if you don't care about doing this on the first place. And this thing still fits your antennas, so Wi-Fi is not going to be an issue. While these channels at the bottom are perfect for the large power cable, your Ethernet, maybe DisplayPort or HDMI, and these channels are large enough for multiple USB cables to just hang out. And of course, this thing is removable with just 2 screws if you want to keep this whole area open. And when closing it, make sure no cable is poking through, and look how clean all these exit right at the back. On the interior, everything is pretty clever in Phanteks manner. So the white case actually has silver screws, the black one has all black. All of our fan panels are easily removable. You don't have to do any ninja stuff to get access to remove them. For example, there's a single thumb screw at the back here for our bottom panel. It's easily accessible, and you can simply pull this out. It sits on these rubber pegs so that you can easily rotate the bracket. I'll show you what that does later. You can remove the back door once the top panel is removed, so you simply just slide it up. Very nice and straightforward. Get out of here. And the side bracket sits on a single thumb screw at the top over here. So once that is removed, you can simply get your hands, and it has a little handle, and you pull it forward to remove the side bracket for installation. These fan brackets are not bending anywhere. They're really thick steel. My only complaint are the thumb screws. They're not captive, so they're easy to lose. This is probably going to be a little controversial for a case that is full tower, but the only space for 140mm fans is at the bottom. Everything else is 120s, and if you do install 120s at the top, 4 on the side, and 4 at the bottom, in terms of the frame, they will look consistent on like exactly how they align, and I appreciate that. This back section is very interesting. So first of all, this panel here is non-removable. It is part of the frame. So that's just something to keep in mind. The power supply goes at the top with all the cables channeling through with their very nicely laid out cable management channels. So we'll see how that goes. We have our storage compartment that you can take off. It can house 3.5-inch drive, or I think 4 SSDs. You can also take this off completely to clean up the space. And this little additional bracket that swivels to open, that has these little hooks over here to route your longer cables through. So once I do cable management, we'll see if this actually works. Uh-oh. My first hiccup in the assembly process is you can see that side bracket has to be installed first before installing anything at the top, because this thing otherwise simply won't fit. All right, actually, if I do remove the bottom panel, I do have enough clearance for me to wedgie this side bracket back in place there. Now, because the top panel is not removable for fan installation, this is part of the frame anyway, so removing the bottom one allows you to install all your side stuff. That is very convenient. That is good to know. And the bracket is in. Luckily, the rest of the fan installation is straightforward. So here at the rear, we have dual 120s, and that gives you that height perspective. And notice, not a single cable entering our main motherboard area. And that is because there's some clever tricks up here. Let's go on the back. Notice we have 2 cutouts for our fan cables exiting into this chamber, and also removing this metal mesh at the back gives us access to our fans for installation, but also you can install a 240 radiator on this side of the frame with the tubes facing up and fans on the other side to have that clean minimalistic look and really hide that radiator too. Although, to be honest, I wish this metal mesh was slightly more open. I get that it's there to prevent from cables entering the fan blades and stuff, but I find this to be a little bit too restricting, and it might be loud because once those fans start going, there's going to be a lot of restrictive elements right in front of them. The bottom fan bracket is the only place where we can actually mount 140mm fans, and because we have these triple strips, you have basically 3 positions for your 120mm fans, either closest to the motherboard or slightly further away, depending on how you have the stuff set up. But also right now, notice all my fans are in horizontal position, and so what I can do is just take this out and rotate the bracket without any other configuration changes, and basically pop it back in and lock it in place. And now we have slightly angled fans for a little different visual variety. And if you do have, let's say, RGB fans mounted on here, it does give you a little bit more of that extra bling, you know? But more importantly, the fans would just follow the same angle as this front panel of the frame for things to look a bit more cohesive, you know? Now, before I do cable management, which I think is going to be fairly straightforward, I do want to point out that having a non-water-cooled system in here feels like it's a little bit wasted. You know, there's a lot of room above the motherboard tray, for example, unless you have an AIO that has a really thick radiator or you're doing push and pull, which this Hyte gives you. But right now I have more fans in here in terms of price than the actual case. Like I have 3 packs with those D30 fans and they're all around $90 for the 3 packs. So that's why, you know, that's a little bit ridiculous to put it in this case, but I will say it does look pretty awesome. Also, I do have the new D30 fans as well that I will place in the white system just so we can experience the proper RGB-ness together. Also, just in case you're not populating 4 fans on the side here, we have these plastic magnetic covers that just simply go over the spacing here just to block off some of the airflow and things look slightly better. And there are 2 of them, so you can place one at the top and one at the bottom. Installing the power supply is straightforward. There's a little pad at the bottom over here. Everything here is unrestricted. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that because that little platform is fairly thin, just careful not to have the power supply jump out. In putting this thing back together, it does help to flatten those cables into this chamber, but also we have so much room right above the power supply here for just collecting all your cables. And you know, this is like literally a 30-second job. I could spend an hour on here making sure everything looks pretty, but this works for me, man. For example, you can wrap 24-pin cable around these columns. I mean, it works, it collects the cable, but also not doing it does pretty much the same thing once you close this little bracket. But perhaps the coolest thing around the motherboard when it comes to cable management are these brackets. This one just sits on clips and it slides into place, connects at the top with little pins, so you don't have to connect any cables. And this way it helps to, as you can see, hide a little bit of that exiting cable, and it can be inverse to support larger EATX motherboards while not totally defeating the purpose of trying to hide some of the exiting cables from here. There is also a top cover that has the exact same purpose, RGB illumination, hide some of the exiting cables, and it is also completely sort of wireless. You don't have to connect anything, it just connects with pins. And now we have a very clean looking motherboard area that somewhat hides the cables and also has beautiful RGB illumination. I also would say this gives the motherboard that indented look into the frame, which I think looks awesome, especially once everything is populated and turned on. Plus, nobody wants a sagging GPU, and this thing is a massive, which is why we have a GPU support holder that you can install on one of these brackets. I'm going to use 2 thumb screws here just because we have a 4-slot graphics card. And we'll tighten these once we put the graphics card in place. Okay, so this has to be lower, so we'll have to just use 1. Does that work? It's not the most comfortable thing to work with. All right, no more sagging GPU, although I don't particularly like how bulky this looks, but at least everything is safe. Now, once everything is assembled, my goodness, I love that ambient strip around the motherboard. Really highlights that component at its core. Lots of fan configuration options, which is lovely, but that height loss is definitely visible with a single 360 AIO. So if you're not going for water cooling, perhaps the NV7 is not going to be for you. Potentially wait for the NV5, you know. The cost of all the fans in here is higher than the case itself. First panel installed. Second glass in place. There's a lot of glass, my goodness. Can't wait to see what the white system looks like with all the panels installed. Now the white model, my goodness. With the right components, looks absolutely gorgeous. I love the angled fans. Gives you additional airflow because they're slightly further away from the ground, but also give you that awesome visual from an angle. And that dual channel RGB illumination is excellent, so I can separate certain components that kind of matches my color scheme. And yeah, let's put on the glass, see what's up. I would recommend placing all the screws back in their place for all your panels, just so that you don't lose them. And when it comes to reinstallation, they're exactly right where you need to be. I would recommend peeling the interior plastic of the glass in the very end, so you don't get all that interior stuff dirty, you know? The top panel is next. And now the next 10 minutes to clean the glass panels. And there you have it, the complete assembly for the NV7 in white, all white components, the new D30 fans. Bottom fans are in reverse so that they are actually intaking air, but without compromising on the visuals. Wow, I think this looks stunning. Obviously, this is not something that I would run for my case itself because I feel like there's a lot of space wasted. But if you, after this like grand look and you want to populate certain RGB components in here, I mean, what do you guys think? Do you like this look? I will say the new D30 fans look absolutely incredible. They daisy chain, they're easy to install. You know, a few too many clips for my liking, but also if you're loving the looks, hold off on buying them just yet because we have a full review coming up. And we just actually, the team in Montreal did an incredible job with the RGB fan roundup, comparing looks, performance, noise, and etc. So the new D30s, once we get more samples, definitely going to be a very interesting comparison to what is available in the market already. And of course, we cannot forget the temperatures. So the thing is, at stock, there are no fans included. So obviously our CPU, GPU temperatures are going to be really, really bad. As soon as I add the 2 exhaust and 1 bottom intake, temperatures really stabilize on the CPU side, right in the middle of the pack for my airflow configuration, while the GPU is quite healthy as long as you add the fan. So this is a hot box, you know, don't expect miracles if you don't try to work with this case, but you do trade off the aesthetics for something that does not come with any fans. Now, after working with the NV7, doing 2 systems, disassembling, doing some airflow, I'm a little bit torn on the NV7. I love the design. I think it's one of the most beautiful full tower enclosures that I would personally use. I love being able to populate the fans just for the visuals of it, but it is targeted towards enthusiasts and only supporting 120mm fans at the top, the side, and well, sure, the back doesn't matter, is going to be a little bit of a compromise for many people who want to water cool with 140mm radiators, or you know, anything that is beyond 360mm, so like 420 and 480s. And so having none of that support in a tower that could potentially support it from a size perspective is a little bit of a letdown, especially because they are introducing new features around the motherboard, the illumination, the covers, all the cable management system that is built into the back with the plastic channels that is actually helpful. This is clearly not the full tower for whatever water cooling build you want to achieve. You know, it's not like the Lian O11 Dynamic Evo where you can rotate the motherboard, all types of different configuration options for radiators and stuff. This is slightly more specific and channels you into that specific build, which personally I like, but many others might see it as a constraint and like working within the box and not being able to explore the full potential of this size caliber of enclosure. Needless to say, I am very excited for the NV5 or whatever else will come next, because I want those trickle-down features to come into a slightly lower footprint enclosure, and leave it to Phanteks to do some cool, innovative things, you know? So share your thoughts down in the comments below about the NV7. I'm Dmitry, and I'll talk to you in the next video.